Guys, welcome back. Yeah, so in the previous video we talked about OOP, object oriented programming in C sharp, and in this video we'll be talking about exception handling in C sharp. So if you are a returning subscriber, you're welcome, but if you are a new viewer, kindly subscribe to the Train Check YouTube channel and turn on the notification icon so that I can get notified anytime we upload new content. So let's get down into it. So yeah, in this video we'll be talking about exception handling in C sharp. So let me clear this up. Exception handling in C sharp. Exception handling in C sharp. Yeah, so I'll start with what is exception handling in C sharp. So exception handling in C sharp is is a mechanism that allows developer to gracefully handle errors like exceptions, a runtime error or exception in a controlled manner. Yeah, so that it will ensure that um, your program can recover or your program did not stop or break after an exception occurred. So it helps you to gracefully handle your runtime errors in such a way that even if there is any exception during the time your program is being run, your program can gracefully recover from it without being stopped. You understand? So that's what exception handling means in C sharp. So all exceptions in C sharp are derived from the base class called system.exception. All exception in C sharp. We have different types of exception in C sharp. We have nullable, we have no reference exception, we have divide by zero exception, we have argument exception, we have index out of range exception, invalid operation exception. But all these exceptions are being derived from the base class called exception. So in a situation whereby you want to catch an exception and you don't know the name of the exception, you can basically just use the base exception class, which is called exception. So that exception class can basically catch any exception you want from you, since every other exception are being created from that base exception class. So yeah, so syntax for exception handling in C sharp. C sharp uses the try catch finally block for exception handling. So in C sharp, we use the try catch. Even all programming language actually use the try catch block for to catch an error. But in C sharp, we basically uses the every other language also uses try catch. So in C sharp, we use try catch finally block for exception handling. So something like try catch finally. Sorry, just to be outside here. Finally. So C sharp uses try catch finally block to handle this exception. So the try block here will it will contain the code that might throw an exception. So this try block here will actually contain the code that might throw the exception. So if an exception occur, the control is transferred to the corresponding catch block. So this any code inside this place, this try block might contain a code that will actually throw an exception. So, and if an exception occur inside this try block, it will actually pass it to the corresponding catch block that will actually catch the exception. So, in a try catch block, you can have as many catch as possible. Like I said, you have different type of exception you can catch, so you can have as many catch as possible. It's not just one; you can have up to like 5, 6 catches. So, you can have as many catch as possible. You can see, and have as many catch as possible. So if there's an error that occurred in this place and you've specified like up to like 5 catch or 4 catches here, this try block and the exception happened, this try block will actually pass the exception to the corresponding catch block that correspond with the exception that occurred, the corresponding catch block that correspond with the exception that occurred. So let's say in this place you have um, you have nullable exception. Let me pass some nullable reference exception ex. In this second catch, you have divide by zero exception, divide by zero exception. In this next one, you have argument exception. In this next one, you have index out of range exception. So if you try to run any code that might actually throw an exception here and it throw either nullable exception, this particular catch block will catch the nullable null reference exception. Let's say it is the exception that is being thrown here is actually divide by zero. It will skip this block and this catch one will catch the divide by zero exception. Let's say it is index out of range, that it's a index out of range exception that is being thrown inside this try block. It will actually come to this place. This catch block will actually be the one to catch it. This is argument exception. This will actually catch it. So, and sometimes instead of you specifying, if you know the name of the exception you want to catch, you can actually do all this and you can actually catch as many exceptions as possible. That is if you know the name of the exception you want to catch. But in a case where you don't actually know the name of the exception you want to catch, you can just, instead of having multiple exceptions catch block, you can just come down here and just specify the main base exception class. This guy will catch any exception, even the one you don't even know the name. It will catch even the exception you don't know the name. This is the base exception class. Every other exception, all these other ones that I'm specifying before, they are derived from this class. They are derived from this particular class. They inherit this class. So every other is every other exception class, or every other exception that you might want to even specify, they are derived from this class. So this class can actually catch any exception in C# for you. So there are sometimes you might just use this class since you don't know when you don't know the name of the exception you want to catch, or if you know the name, you can just leave this guy out and then generally or explicitly specify the name of the exception you want to catch. So that is how what try catch block means. So and mind you, if any exception is being thrown, the catch block catches it. The finally block will always run. So in try catch block, in try catch finally block, no matter if an exception is thrown or not, this finally block will always run. If the try block does not contain any exception and the code was executed successfully, this finally block will still run, no matter if there is an exception or not. Whatever you have inside this finally block will still run. So most of the time we don't specify this finally block, but in a case whereby you want to, in some cases you might need to make use of the finally block. In some cases you might need to make use of the finally block, but most of the time we don't actually specify it. In the case where you might want to use this finally block is maybe you are opening a connection and no matter if the stuff execute or not, you might want to close the connection back. So you might open the connection in the try block, and then after everything is being executed, you actually close the connection back in the finally block. You understand? So most of the time we don't actually use the finally block, but in some cases, in the scenario I just specified, you might want to use the finally block in such case. So, but just take it, whatever you have in this finally block will always run. So I will show us. So in this place, before um I actually let me comment on this guy. So, and I will comment on the remaining. I want us to catch the exception if one after the other before we actually. So in here, what's the first one? Nullable exception. Let me create another one here. to actually cater for the null exception. So null reference exception. So in this try block, I will try to divide a number by zero. Since divide by zero, if you divide any number by zero, it will actually should give you an exception because you can't divide the number by zero basically in C sharp. So in I think basically in any programming language, so number is equals to like 20, and yeah, so int result is equal to number divided by zero. You always get it will show divide by zero error. So this particular line 6 will actually give you a divide by zero exception. It will show a divide by zero exception because you can't divide the number by zero. You can't divide the number by zero. So it will give you, so in this case I will just say CW error cannot cannot divide by zero by zero. So sorry, cannot divide by zero. Then I will run this. You will see it will write to console that cannot divide by zero. Basically, this catch block will catch the exception and it will write it to the console that cannot divide by zero. So let me run it. You can see error cannot divide by zero. So this guy already catches the error and then it passes on to this try block catch this try block through the error, it through the exception and it passes it on to the corresponding catch block to catch it, which is this divide by zero error. You can see. So but let's say we have something like, I'll just say null reference error, null reference error. So null reference error, sorry. So I will comment on this and do something like this. String name is equal to null. Intentionally want to pass this, so this name will be null at this point, and I will now try to access the value of name here. You get? So I will now say, let me say string access name is equal to name dot to lower. So name is null. I'm now trying to assign a nullable value. I'm still trying to convert a nullable value to what? To lowercase. I'm trying to convert a nullable value to lowercase and assign the value to access name, which we actually threw a null exception in C sharp. So if you try to run this, you will see you will have null reference error. This will actually write null reference error to the console. You can see null reference error because you can't access this value is null and you are trying to access a null value, nullable value. So to throw you an exception called null reference error. You can see since we already know the name of the exception we actually want to catch, we are able to specify it here and then we catch the exception. But in a case whereby we don't know the name, you can just come down here. So yeah, so I said anything inside the finally will run. So I forget to put something inside the finally block. So you see What can I even put inside? Let me just say completed. Execution completed. Execution completed. So if I run this guy again, you'll see, you can see execution completed. So anything you have inside this finally block will actually run, no matter if there is an exception or not. So because there's an exception, that's why this no error is being thrown, non-reference error. But if I now give this guy a value and then I do this, no error will be thrown. You can see execution completed. So no matter if there's an error or not, the finally block will always execute. And there are sometimes you might not want anything to execute after there is no error. You only want to catch the error. If there's an error, throw the error. But if there's no error, don't write anything or don't do anything. Just continue with the flow. So you might want to remove the finally block because in some cases it's not always needed. But in a case whereby you are opening the connection at the top and you need to close the connection back, you might actually need the finally block because the finally block will actually run and it will help you close the connection back, something like that. So that is that for that. So don't forget anything you have inside the finally block will always run. You can see there is no error at this point. You don't have any exception thrown and the finally block still runs. So you can see because I already do this. But if I change it back to null, there will be an error, null exception, null reference error. So if I do this, if I comment on these guys and I comment on this general exception, this guy, no matter the exception, here we already know the exception we want to catch. We are specifying it, divide by zero, but this one is just an error occur. I'll just say error, an error occurred. So this an error occurred will be what it will always show. So if I launch this guy, you will see this catch, no matter the exception. I'll first do the null reference exception. So let's run this. You'll see an error occurred, right? This is the null exception, null reference exception. I will comment on the null reference exception and do the divide by zero exception. It will still tell us an error occurred. So exception, this base exception class, we actually catch the exception, no matter the exception, we actually catch it for you. Even though the exception you do not know the name, the exception you don't know the name, it will still catch it for you. Because every other exception class have been derived from this main base exception class. So that is that for that. So or let's say you can intentionally throw an exception. Even let me just say do this. You can intentionally throw an exception. So let me say I want to throw new arguments. I'll just say throw new argument exception. You can see. So if I comment on this guy and I comment on argument exception, you'll see argument exception error. So it will throw the error and then the argument exception class will actually catch it. You can see argument exception error. Same thing, you can also throw index out of range, which will be index out of range exception, index out of range exception, and index out of range exception. And if you do this to actually catch it, sorry, I did not comment on this guys. So you can see index out of range exception. So that's just this is how to throw an exception by yourself. It's not that the code is the one. It's not that it's your line of code that is training it. You intentionally throw the exception. So that is that for that. So also, I would like to show us how to create your own custom exception in C Sharp. So you can also create your own custom exception, just like all these other exceptions that are being created, argument exception, index out of range, divide by zero exception. You can also create your own custom exception in C Sharp. So to actually create your own custom exception, all you have to do is just public create your exception custom exception class. So I'll just say custom exception, and then it will inherit the base exception class. Like I said, all these other ones are inheriting the base exception class. So if you actually pick the definition of this guy, you will see that this is it. They are inheriting, and you can see inherit the system exception. You can see they inherit the system exception, and they have the you can see so they inherit the system exception and they have all this. So yeah, that's the same thing, basically the same thing we will do. So exception, you can just inherit the base exception class. Sorry, inherit the base exception class, and then you create your constructor. You generate a constructor for it. So control dot. So every other ones too they inherit the main base exception class. So control dot. Then can just do can have as many. So this I will just do string message, and this can be nullable value, and this you can just say string message and exception basically. Yeah, so something like this. So if you come down here, you can just and so to make use of it, we just have to add this catch here to catch our own custom exception. So we can have the custom exception passed here. You can say custom exception, and then can throw the exception here just like with the way we throw new custom exception. And you can, if you see, if we launch this, you will see it will catch the this catch block will be the one to catch the exception we just throw here. And then so let's see, you can see custom exception error. So we've created our own custom exception error, and we've actually thrown it, and then we've seen how it is being catch. So this can be defined, this can be structured more, this can be structured more than this, and you can just read more on exception, custom creating of custom exception, and you can understand, yeah, it. But this is basically how you can create your own custom exception. This is just an example of how you can create your own custom exception. So you have the normal, it will inherit the main base exception class, and then add in all your response. So you can basically still pass in a message here, because there's a constructor that accepts a message, you can see two overload. There is one that does not have accept anything. There is one that accepts, that is expecting a message, and there is one that's expecting a message that can be null, and then an exception class itself. So I'm basically passing any message, any message in here, and but so that is that for that. Basically, that is that for that. That is that for that. So I believe with all this, we should understand error handling and custom exception and different types of exception we have in C sharp. So if there's any question you have, or if there's anything you do not understand and you basically want me to explain for you, you can basically drop them in the comment section. I will attend to each and every question. So guys, don't forget to like this video. Don't forget to subscribe to Train Check YouTube channel. Don't forget to turn on the notification icon so that I can get notified anytime we upload new content. And if you have any question, like I said earlier, you can drop them in the comment section. I will attend to each and every question. So guys, thank you guys. See you in the next video.